Before I begin, let me acknowledge the great work of my great staff who've lived and breathed birds for months. This is the title of the report, and I'm using the word Taonga in its plural as a collective noun because I see our native birds collectively as a great treasure. New Zealand, the land, didn't have any mammals except for a couple of bats, but instead birds sitting at the top of our ecosystems. The report begins with a vision: restoring abundant, diverse, resilient bird life on the mainland. People who know me know that I'm not generally given to visions, but this one has crept up on me. Abundant and resilient, plenty of healthy birds, diverse, not just kiwi and tui and the odd pewaka waka. But why back to the mainland? New Zealand has had great success with island conservation. This is Anchor Island in Dusky Sound, free of introduced mammals for over a decade, and I've been one of the few people lucky enough to visit it. But is our future only to be island museums that hardly anyone can visit? Some of these islands are running out of carrying capacity with a lack of food or territory for the birds, and with small isolated populations comes the risk of inbreeding. I'm not a biologist, and it's been an eye-opener to discover just how many different kinds of native birds we have. In our forests, we have 41 different birds. In our fields, rivers, and along our coasts, we have 70. And out at sea, we have 57. This adds up to 168 native bird species in all, and over half of them, 93, are endemic. That is, they are found in no other country. Contrast this with the United Kingdom, which has one endemic bird. So, what state are our birds in? How are they doing? So of the 168 native birds, in serious trouble, a third. In serious trouble. In some trouble, 48%, about a half. And doing okay, a mere 20%, 1 in every 5. This is a desperate situation. Since humans arrived here, about 50 bird species have disappeared. But of the native birds that we still have, 1 in 3, it totals 55 actually, I think, is in serious trouble, that is, in danger of extinction. And this is despite the great efforts of so many. The Department of Conservation, of course, private landowners, thousands of farms with covenants, the many iwi who are active in restoring what has been lost, councils, philanthropists, community groups from one end of the country to the other. But here are some of our endemic birds, the ones found nowhere else, that are in serious trouble. The kea, the only parrot in the world that lives in mountains. The wrybill, this is one of my favourites. This lives in the braided rivers of the South Island, the only bird in the world with a beak that curves to the side, always to the right. Very good at getting insects from under round river stones. The whio, the blue duck, a duck that lives in fast flowing rivers and streams in the bush. You can think of it as the whitewater kayaker of the bird world. The Antipodean wandering albatross, looks like a courting couple here, which wanders vast distances across the South Pacific. The Fiordland crested penguin that lives in the forest, a penguin that lives in the forest, and a penguin with attitude that thinks it's a punk rocker. The takahi, believed to be extinct for a very long time, but discovered in Fiordland 70 years ago due to one man's persistence. These are 6 of the birds found nowhere else in the world that are in serious trouble. The kea, the wrybill, the whio, the wandering albatross, the crested penguin, and the takahi. But going back to the vision that has guided this investigation, restoring abundant, diverse, and resilient bird life on the mainland. To achieve this, birds need 3 things. First is safety from predators. This is the big one, it's urgent. The second one is the right sort of habitat, food to eat and somewhere to nest. And the third one is genetic diversity. Without a measure of genetic diversity, birds will lack resilience, the ability to adapt and evolve. A bunch of clones is not resilient. In the report, there are 3 chapters on predators, 1 on habitat and 1 on genetic diversity and resilience. And the recommendations at the end of the report relate to these. And there are 7 recommendations: a plan for predator-free 2050, high priority research on predators, breakthrough genetic science that has the potential of even eradicating some predators, high priority policy on habitat, policy that is needed for genetic diversity, maintaining it, more funding, the need to invest a lot more in our natural heritage, and finally community groups from one end of the country to the other that need to be supported and coordinated. So I'm going to go through each of the recommendations for you. Right, so recommendation number one, predator-free 2050, the goal, of course, that the government set last year. And in that goal, there is a big focus on these three predators: possums, rats, and stoats, the biggest killer of all. It's actually great to have this goal because it focuses our attention on predators, the urgent threat to our birds. Not just to our birds, of course, but to our lizards and our frogs and our insects as well. Predator-free 2050 needs to be organised. It needs a plan. A hands-off approach isn't going to work. So my first recommendation is for a portfolio, identifying a portfolio of large areas that we seek to make free of predators, or at least keep predators' numbers low enough for birds to be safe. Areas like this, or this, or this, and I'll talk more about why they need to be large later. The second recommendation is about high priority predator research. Already we have at the moment an exciting wave of innovation, new poisons, traps that reset themselves, and so on. This is great, but we need a lot more. And here is one place where we need more and fast. Feral cats out across the countryside and in bush margins. The most intractable predator. They've been estimated to be in the millions. In some parts of the country, they will be breeding particularly fast because of a ready supply of fresh rabbit. My third recommendation is about breakthrough genetic science. The potential uses of genetic science that could eradicate some predators entirely, using technologies like this one called gene drive. The green rats contain a gene that you want spread through the population. It might be a gene that, for instance, makes all the sons of the females infertile. And it's called gene drive because the gene can be driven through the population. So you've got one green rat up the top, but then by the time you get down to, I guess it's the great-grandchildren, they're all green. And that's obviously a schematic diagram, but it conveys the idea. Some of these potential techniques would involve some kind of genetic modification. So my third recommendation is about beginning to engage with the public right now about these possibilities. This science should not be behind closed doors. But if eradication of predators becomes possible, it is still many years away. We may eventually succeed in eradicating them in the future, but we cannot rely on it. And this is like building a wonderful high-tech hospital. By the time it's built, the patient may be dead. So the birds may die before breakthrough genetic technologies are available. Remember, only 20% of our native birds are in good shape, 80% are not. We must absolutely keep doing whatever we can to keep predators down to low numbers. That includes using 1080 for the foreseeable future, because with it, populations of possums, rats and stoats can be knocked down to low levels over large areas cost effectively. Recommendation number 4 is about habitat, somewhere for birds to live and indeed to thrive. Here is one of the destroyers of habitat you may not be aware of. 2 goats there in that photo, up a tree in the King Country. The black one in the back is fast asleep with a belly full of foliage. Here's another destroyer of habitat. The lupins and gorse and broom and poplar and willow in the braided riverbeds of the South Island where some of our birds nest, including the wrybill, one of my favourites. Another destroyer of bird habitat in those riverbeds is 4-wheel drives. That is a photo of a squashed black tern chick. These are riverbeds, not roads. My 5th recommendation is about genetic diversity. A population of birds that does not have enough genetic diversity will become inbred and vulnerable and eventually struggle to breed, like the kakapo. Kakapo are amazing birds, nocturnal, flightless parrots, the heaviest parrots in the world, which seems to go, I think, with being unable to fly. But tragically, they are all very similar genetically. They teeter on the brink of extinction. And because they're all so much alike, they struggle to breed and lack resilience. The kakapo is a bird at the bottom of the cliff, through no one's fault, I should say. We must pay more attention to genetic diversity in birds that haven't gotten to the bottom of the cliff, because when you get there, it becomes very expensive and, if not, impossible. This is a kokako on an island in the Hauraki Gulf, the bird with the most beautiful call of all. But the population of kokako on this island is very small, and one of these birds, named Bandit, that's irrelevant, is now consorting with his grandmother. This might be a happy relationship, but it can't be a healthy relationship. Where are our birds now? Many of them are on predator-free islands like this. Some are in mainland sanctuaries, and others are in small fragments of habitat. But small isolated populations of birds are likely to become inbred. To save our birds, we need to focus on large areas, keeping the predators down, large areas of habitat that can support large populations of birds. But this is going to take more money, and recommendation 6 is about finding new sources of money. A border levy for tourists is one that should really be considered, and they could get a bird stamp in their passports. So should higher charges on tourists visiting national parks, like all these people on the Tongariro crossing. That doesn't look like New Zealand, does it? That doesn't look like a New Zealand national park. We're used to it. Other countries aren't squeamish about this. Why are we? My 7th recommendation is about community groups, supporting and coordinating the efforts of hundreds of them across the country. We've met some of these during this investigation, including these people working to restore a wetland in sand dune country a little north of here. So to finish where I started, with a vision, restoring abundant, resilient bird life on the mainland, diverse bird life on the mainland. Ka ora te ngāhere, ka ora ngā manu Māori, ka ora ai te iwi. Thank you.
Okay.